Hello and welcome to part 3 of the ride around Launceston motorcycle video series. I'm reluctant to use that term vlog because it's such an ugly term, an ugly word. I don't like it, so I understand it's short for video log or something or other, but anyway, we're part 3 of the ride around Launceston motorcycle video. In the last part I was on, I think it's called Blessington Road, which I'm still on here, and you've just seen that huge truck pass me. I was looking for a point where I could pass that truck and turn around and go back. I didn't want to continue going on the Blessington Road, not because I had anything against it, it just was going in a direction I didn't want to go in. You follow it far enough, it'll take you to Ben Lomond, which is the, as I think I said in the previous video, that's the ski fields of Tasmania. Certainly worth the drive out there, and the drive up what's called Jacob's Ladder, which is the winding road up to Ben Lomond, is certainly worth a drive, and the view is from the top of Ben Lomond is spectacular, but it just wasn't where I wanted to go that day. I can't speak about the ski fields because I don't know anything about skiing, and I've not been there in winter, but I've been there in summer, and it's certainly worth the drive, and the views are, as I said, spectacular. Now, in the last 2 videos I talked about the Australian electrical system, and I figure that you've probably learned as much as you need to learn, and maybe you're even bored with hearing about that, so I thought I'd talk about something different in this video, and that would be to just describe what I'm doing and where I am and what the roads are like and things like that, so you get a bit of running commentary of what's going on, and there might be just some periods of silence where nothing's being said and you can see what's being said. So in the words of Richie Benno, don't do the Monty Python and state the bleeding obvious. So that's what I'm going to do, talk about the roads and where I'm going. So I'm on the Blessington Road now. I think this is called the Blessington Road, and I'm heading back towards Launceston. So I guess I'm going generally in a northerly direction back towards the city of Launceston. And I think this is probably a C class, maybe a B class road, and you can see that it's reasonably wide. There are markings down the middle. At some places there are those white posts on the side to tell you where the edges of the road are. There are no markings on the side, and as you can see there are road planned, and I think they're trying to grade the shoulders to make the shoulders better than they were and firmer. I'm just passing one right now. There's a lot of hedges. The hedge and bushes and shrubbery is quite high, but it's back from the road, so you get that sense of openness that I've talked about before. Sometimes when you're riding a road and the tree line is quite close to the road, I certainly get a feeling of closed-in feeling. I'm not claustrophobic, but there's certainly a closed-in feeling, and it casts shadows across the road and so on, and that's a different feeling from when the vegetation is back from the edge of the road and giving you a more open feeling. Just coming into the, I think, settlement, I think is probably the best way to describe it, of White Hills. There are a few farmhouses and other sorts and other houses here, but there are no services or amenities, so the nearest place for any sort of basic services would be St Leonard's, but if you needed something more than St Leonard's, I guess the nearest place would be somewhere like Newstead, where there's a Coles supermarket and hairdressers and other specialty shops like that. The one thing I noticed a little bit further back, going further south just before I turned around, was an area of cultivation that had a sign up saying Penfolds, and I have come out on this road a few times over the years that I've been coming to Launceston, and I've seen this patch of acreage or paddocks or whatever that belong to Penfolds, and when I first noticed them there was only a very small area that they had planted grapes or established a vineyard, and it seemed to get a bit bigger in 2020 when I was here, and now of course it is much larger. There seems to be a much bigger area that's under cultivation of grapes by Penfolds. And when I noticed this, I was reminded of a program that I watched on the ABC some years ago talking about winemakers, and in particular talking about winemakers in Victoria. And it mentioned the situation where winemakers, and I think one of the ones they mentioned was Brown Brothers. Now, I'm not a wine drinker, but I've checked with somebody else and they tell me there is a winemaker called Brown Brothers, so I didn't imagine that. But winemakers who were in the lower areas of Victoria were now either looking to partner with vineyards that were in the high country or find land themselves that they could put under cultivation for grapes. And their reasons for doing that, and I know this sounds a bit odd when they're in the middle of horrendous flooding all over the eastern coast of of Australia, but the reasons for doing that were saying that the weather had become hotter and drier, and because of pollution from fires and pollution from Melbourne and so on, in order for these winemakers to continue to make the wine of the same quality that they'd been making before, they had to move to higher areas into the alpine regions to get the cleaner air and the other things that they needed. Now, I'm, as I said, not a wine drinker, but I know that one of the things that affects the quality of the grapes and the quality of the wine is the soil type. But of course, you can imagine if there's been lots of fires and there's still that smoky smell and ash in the air, that's going to affect the grapes. And obviously, hotter, drier weather is going to have an impact on the grapes. So winemakers were moving to higher regions in Victoria to find areas that were more suitable for growing their grapes. And at the same time, other winemakers were looking for properties in Tasmania. Now, on both sides of the Tamar River, that is on the east and west, moving north of Launceston towards Beaconsfield on the western side of the river and Georgetown and Lowhead on the right-hand side, on the eastern side of the river, I beg your pardon, there are many wineries. Some are small boutique wineries and some are a little bit larger. And so some of these companies have looked apparently to partner with these Tasmanian wineries. Even further afield into the northeast at Pipers River, for example, there's another winery that's, I guess that's the right word for it. They are the people there have won awards for the quality of their sparkling, I think that's the right word, champagne, but they're not allowed to call it champagne now because of some embargo by the European Union, but it's that sort of wine. So Tasmanian wines are very well regarded. But the point I'm making here is that here are companies that have accepted that something's going on with the climate. And it's not a place here for me to argue for or against climate change, but there are companies that are saying, well, something's happening to the weather, something's happening to the climate, it's affecting the quality of our product. With a thing like wine, the only thing you have is the taste and the flavour of the wine. And so if the taste and the flavour of the wine deteriorates, people are not going to buy it. And so the companies have said, well, we've got to find another way to continue. We can either continue to produce the product we have, which is quality and flavour is deteriorating because of environmental factors, or we can find another way to produce that wine, and that is to look for higher ground or look for ground in another part of Australia, and that's what they've done. Okay, so going through White Hills there, and I turned on to, I think this road is called White Hills Road, and it's going to take me, it's a C-class road, and you can see what I mean by C-class here, that it's quite narrow, there are no markings on the road, the shoulder is almost non-existent, there's no markings on the edges of the road either. Those white posts, just like the one we're passing at the moment, are fewer and further between, although there's a couple of them quite close together there. And the edges are a little bit broken and uneven. But then, in defence of that, I suppose this is a road that is used sparingly because it doesn't actually go anywhere. There's no reason to go along here unless you are going from White Hills through to Evandale, which is where this road will take you, or to Relbia, which is a sort of settlement area, locality south-east of Launceston. It is also a place where there are a number of wineries, including the well-known in Tasmania Joseph Cromie winery. So this is the White Hills Road, and it's going to take me up now to the intersection here where a right turn will take me to Relbia and back towards Launceston, and a left turn will take me to the village of, I think that's probably the best word to describe it, of Evandale. Evandale, I'll talk a bit more about that when we get a bit closer, is about 20 k's from Launceston. It's just past the airport. But again, you can see these are those C-class roads, that is roads that are one lane in each direction. Some have markings, some don't. Tasmania, for the most part, has fairly good roads, and in fact a British motorcycle magazine, which I think was called Motorcycling, came to Tasmania several years ago and rode all over the island, and at the end of the ride all over the island announced to its readership that Tasmania had the best motorcycling roads in the world. Now, I've not ridden anywhere but mainly New South Wales and Tasmania. I've done a little bit of riding in Victoria and a little bit of riding in Queensland, so I can't attest to whether they are the best roads in the world, but I can say that some of the roads here are really great motorcycling roads, in the sense there are lots of twists and turns, and the people who've been from Hobart through to Queenstown and Strahan on the west coast will attest to that being a great motorcycle road with something like 99 curves on it. But there are other roads that are great motorcycle roads because they have lots of twists and turns and bends and all that sort of stuff that motorcyclists love. But there are some words of caution that are worth knowing about Tasmanian roads. That is, there's lots and lots of wildlife that likes to wander onto the roads. I don't think I've seen anywhere near as much roadkill on any other roads, either in New South Wales or other states where I've either ridden my bike or I've driven a car, as I've seen it various times on Tasmanian roads. And that's not to say that drivers are careless, it's just there is a lot of wildlife, and the wildlife just wanders onto the road and unfortunately gets hit by cars. So wildlife, a lot of roadkill, and wildlife is common on the roads. Lots of the roads are in shadow even in summertime, and black ice is a common feature. And so I guess that, stating the obvious, when you're riding Tasmanian roads, first of all, before you set out, try and determine what class of road you're on. Now, there are no toll roads in Tasmania. There are highways, obviously the things like the Tasman Highway that I mentioned earlier in this ride, the Midland Highway that goes between Launceston and Hobart, the Bass Highway that goes from Launceston to Devonport. Then there's the Leake, L-E-A-K-E Highway that goes between Campbelltown and Bicheno towards the east coast. So there are highways, and those roads are generally well maintained. In some parts they're dual carriageways, not all of them, but there is a program underway to make the Midland Highway a dual carriageway all the way from Launceston to Hobart. Now, that program was announced when Will Hodgman was the Premier, and that's probably going back about 8 years. And I think at the time they said it was a 10-year project. I don't know where they're up to with it, but it will be a great improvement in the quality of that road when they finally get to it, because there are some passages that are quite narrow and one lane in each direction. But so the first thing I would say is, when you're riding the Tasmanian roads, get a map and get a detailed map that tells you the class of road that you're on. So there are the highways, then there are the A, B and C class roads. The A class roads are the highways. The B class roads are generally well maintained and reasonably wide and may have overtaking lanes. Generally will be sealed all the way and have shoulders on them and markings and so on. Then there are the C class roads, like the ones we've been on, some of the roads we've been on today, that are reasonably well maintained in terms of the councils come out and fill the potholes and fill the patches, put patches on patches and so on. But they don't always have markings on them. They don't always have good shoulders. They don't always have those guideposts on the side of the road. And they don't always have those markings on the sides of the road to show you the side of the road. And so know the class of road. Always stating again the obvious, ride to the conditions. You might be an experienced rider, but unless you are a local Tasmanian, and even then, even if you are, you may be riding in an area you're not familiar with. But if you're not a local Tasmanian, then ride to the conditions. And the weather here can change quite dramatically in a short period of time. Just interrupting that lecture, we're coming into the village of Evandale. This is the southeastern edge of Evandale. Evandale is a small village, maybe 1,000 people or so, to the southeast of Launceston, just past the airport. There are two things that it is particularly famous for. Lots of other things besides these two particular things, including its historic buildings, but two things that it is particularly famous for is that every year they have a penny farthing festival here. Now, the penny farthings are those bicycles from the olden days that have a really big front wheel and a little wheel at the back. And every year they have a penny farthing racing festival around the streets of Evandale. I think the last time it was held they had about 100 riders, so those people all come, their support crew come, lots of other followers come to watch the ride. It's a very popular event and it brings lots of tourists to the village. The other thing that's popular, that's Evandale is famous for, is the Glover Art Prize. John Glover was an Australian landscape artist, and I think he lived and painted a lot around the village of where Evandale is now. And there's an art prize which I think is worth something like $30,000. The winner gets something like $30,000. And so there's a landscape art competition, I guess, like the Archibald Prize, which is called the John Glover Prize. And so exhibitors are invited to submit a piece of landscape work. There's a panel judges them for the ones that are going to make the final cut. There's a display here in the local pavilion, and then a panel chooses the winner, and the winner gets the substantial prize. There is a picture of John Glover, a statue rather of John Glover, just outside the pavilion, and also just across from the Clarendon Arms, which is a very famous and well-known hotel in Evandale, is a sculpture of a penny farthing. Now we're just going out of Evandale and making a left turn onto the road towards Perth, and coming up to a area called Honeysuckle Banks. Now I was talking about riding into the conditions, and I'll talk a bit more about this in the next video. This one's about to run out, so I'll say thank you for watching and listening, and I hope you've enjoyed my little tourism guide and lecture about the road conditions, and I will talk to you again when I'm preparing the next video.